Well, a bleak message was delivered this week by the Reserve Bank as it hiked the official cash rate by a record 75 basis points. Adrian Orr telling the country a recession is on its way.
And it's predicted to hit the same time as next year's election.
The Reserve Bank is warning New Zealanders to brace for a likely recession in 2023.
Just cool the jets. Inflation is no one's friend.
The cost of petrol is soon expected to reach record levels.
I'd be expecting some of the hardest and highest price rises coming forward.
Yeah, think harder about your spending. Think about saving rather than consuming. I know that's a strange concept.
Life is still really hard for so many thousands of Kiwi kids.
It's a pretty worrying forecast.
You are deliberately engineering a recession.
I think that is correct.
I repeat my call that the government should do an independent inquiry into how we got here.
So I asked Finance Minister Grant Robertson this week whether he thinks a recession is unavoidable.
The head of the IMF said just a week ago that countries in 2023 will either feel like they're in a recession or they'll actually be in one. And that is the nature of where we are with the global economic environment. I never want to see New Zealand go into a recession. It's not an absolute guarantee. We're talking about a forecast here. But the conditions globally are going to make it very hard for any country. And obviously we've also got the issue of the fact that inflation appears to be sticking around a bit more. That means the Reserve Bank's responding with OCR increases, and then all of that leads to what will be a difficult year. From my perspective, I don't want a recession, but we have to work towards how we're going to support New Zealanders through a pretty tough time.
The Reserve Bank seems to admit that it has engineered a recession for New Zealand. Is that necessary?
Everyone in the system's got different roles, and the role of the Reserve Bank is to get inflation back down to that 1 to 3% band. And part of what they do in that is look at the demand side of the economy and try to reduce demand. My view, as I've said, is that we don't have to go into recession. It's what's called a soft landing, where yes, demand and supply can get themselves back into sync, but that will require, some slowing down in the economy. My job's a different one in the system. My job is I'll just finish this. My job is to support New Zealanders, to help them stay and work, to be able to get through this period of time. The Reserve Bank Governor has his job, I have mine. We try to work together.
But given that Adrian Orr is saying that basically he is trying to engineer a shallow recession, do you still have confidence in him?
I've got confidence in Adrian's role. I mean, over the course of the last couple of years...
Adrian's role or Adrian Orr?
Yeah, Adrian. I wouldn't have reappointed him, Simon, if I didn't.
But to beat inflation, the Reserve Bank is saying that unemployment has to rise. How many Kiwis are going to have to lose their jobs to beat inflation?
It's the same position for me, Simon. I'm all about New Zealanders being in work. We've got a record number of New Zealanders in work. We have record low unemployment. It is a fact of life of the forecasts that unemployment is forecast to rise. Again, I do not want unemployment to rise beyond what is absolutely necessary.
What is absolutely necessary? If it's full employment now, what is absolutely necessary?
And look, we want as many New Zealanders to stay in work as possible, but there is a global economic crisis that we're facing.
So you acknowledge that people will be losing jobs?
The forecasts tell us that that's the case, but I don't want that to be anything more than it needs to be. And, so again, these are about the different roles in the system. What we're all trying to achieve here is a balance. Inflation is bad for everybody. We all know it needs to come down. On the other side of the coin, people being in work is really, really important. And so you'll never get me to argue that people should be unemployed. I'm in the Labour Party. It's what we're founded on.
I understand that. But the forecasts, as we're talking about them, are for almost 5% unemployment around about election time. That's an extra 50,000 people out of work in a year's time. Not a good prognosis. And it gets worse. Could this be as bad as the global financial crisis?
Well, the depth of impact of COVID on the global economy is actually greater than the global financial crisis. What we've had in New Zealand over the last couple of years is the fact that our economy has been really resilient, partly because of what we did in terms of supporting people through, but partly because our export sector has done well, because New Zealanders are genuinely working really hard to create productivity in our economy. So we've been quite insulated in the last couple of years from this. There were never, ever going to be any costless decisions in COVID. There was always going to be a time when the global economy had to reset itself. The thing is,
so
New Zealand, just let me finish that. New Zealand comes into that in one of the strongest positions in the world. So we come into that with unemployment at 3.3%. That means that we can absorb this economic shock better. But you know, this is something about the global economic cycle we have to understand and accept and support New Zealanders through it.
Is it the global economic cycle, or is it the decisions not only that you've made, but also the Reserve Bank has made? I mean, the OCR, biggest jump ever, more to come, and some economists are saying that it's gone too hard and will cause unnecessary economic pain. Yeah,
look, I don't tend to comment on those specific decisions, but clearly when the Reserve Bank is making its decisions, it's got a balance to strike as well. They are facing a situation where inflation is well outside of their target band. We all know the damage high inflation can cause, particularly to low-income people. So they have taken their decisions about how to do that.
Homeowners, like the average fixed mortgage rate is 3.8% at the moment. If that does jump to like 7% next year on a 500k mortgage, that's $1,000 extra a month. Where are those Kiwis going to find that money? Yeah, look, and that's a problem that Adrian Orr has given you.
That will be a significant issue for some households. It's important to point out that when banks lend, they stress test, and that's part of the regulatory environment we have. So they've stress tested the borrowers at a higher rate than what they're currently paying. So for the vast bulk of people, they will get through this. Yes, it will be tough for them, but there won't be catastrophic consequences.
There is a big shock coming, though. 46% of mortgages are going to be refixed in the next year.
That's right, and people will have to manage their way through that. One of the good pieces of news is that they manage their way through that in work and with wages having risen just a little bit ahead of inflation over the last few years. So there is a buffer built in. Doesn't stop it being hard for households. It will be tough for many households, but we come into this with households with a better starting point than most others in the world.
What about the banks? Are they going to be the bigger winners from this as the interest rates rise?
I think what the banks, need to do here is take a good look at their customer base and how they support their customer base. Banks have done well in New Zealand over a very long period of time, not just recently.
But particularly recently, record profits.
Indeed, and so banks, we're asking them, and they have said this themselves, that they recognise that for those customers, particularly those who've borrowed in the last couple of years, that they will be under strain in this next period. And I do reinforce what I've said before. Banks have a social licence to operate in New Zealand, and our strong expectation is they will look after customers through this period.
So your message to them is don't kick people out of their homes, don't take them to mortgagee sales?
Absolutely, and let's be careful here. The number of people heading in that direction is a relatively low percentage of people, but absolutely. My message to the banks is that, we've worked together through COVID. This is another period of time where we want them to be working with their customers. And actually, in fairness to them, they've signalled to us that's what they're going to do.
Do you accept that government spending has played a part in this cost of living crisis?
I accept that government spending needed to increase during COVID. And I think so did my opponents at the time. They might be telling a different story now. That level of government spending was necessary, but what happens now, and is happening now, is that comes off. So we got government spending up to around 35% of GDP, similar to what it was in and around the GFC and the Canterbury earthquakes. It's now coming down by the end of this year to 31%, and it will track down further from there. So there were no costless decisions. We had to invest in supporting people through COVID. Now we need our fiscal position to consolidate, and that is what we're doing.
So people are going to be paying for those decisions, aren't they? I mean, and you at the time did urge everybody to get out there and spend once lockdowns were over to support local businesses. They have done that. Now we've got inflation.
Yeah, but as I say, there are no costless decisions, Simon. I stand by the fact that we saved lives and we saved livelihoods. When we did initiatives like the wage subsidy scheme, which is what we're talking about here, that's the thing that kept people in work. We also invested heavily in our health system to make sure that people stayed healthy and alive. I will always stand by those decisions.
Adrian Orr wants everybody to, quote him, cool their jets, including you. You're saying there are no costless decisions. What government spending are you going to cut back on?
But as I say, we're now looking to that period. That's the period we're coming in now.
So you're saying you've already factored all in?
This is the thing. I know I heard the Leader of the Opposition say everything had changed when the Reserve Bank made their statement. Well, I don't think he's been paying attention, because we've been factoring this in since the budget in May. We know we need to be careful with our spending now. There are some core things we've got to keep spending
Sure,
on.
but can you give me an example of where you have taken that advice? What spending have you cut or pushed back?
But it's not a matter of making a knee-jerk reaction like that. It's an absolute plan to say we need to keep investing in health, we need to keep investing in education, the services that people rely on. But people will see when we do a budget policy statement in a week or two, and when they see the budget next year, that we will have to be very careful in what we invest in from here on out in order to bring ourselves back to that fiscal position.
So you have not identified anything or put out publicly anything that you have actually decided to cut or push back in terms of spending?
So we work.
You can't name one thing.
We work every day with our ministers to make sure that they're spending wisely. And when we do the half-yearly update in December, people will be able to see once again, as we did at the budget. So in the budget in May, we had $1 billion of savings that we found. We will, when you see the half-yearly update, you'll see how we've done that.
So you're going through it line by line?
And we do that every single day, Simon. We go through and we say, is the spending still necessary? Do you still need this money?
So all the ministers on notice, are they?
We took $1 billion out at Budget 2022, and you'll see when we do the half-yearly update in a couple of weeks what we've been continuing to do.
That seems to say big spending tickets are off the table next year.
I said that in Budget in May.
So tax cuts off the table?
We haven't set our tax policy, and so I can't answer that question for you.
But I can't see how they could be possible in this environment.
Well, certainly we will not be putting out tax policy that unnecessarily exacerbates inflation, because that would be irresponsible.
Well, what about more targeted policies that you like to help people out?
Yeah, and look, as I say, we will always look to do that. We're in an interesting period in the economy, aren't we? Because the 2 quarters of growth that we haven't had reports on yet, Q3 of 2022 and Q4, are both going to be really strong. They're predicted in the Reserve Bank numbers this week to amount to 1.8% growth. Actually, that's the last 2 quarters this year and the first of next. Then we have the shallow recession. That actually is 1% of growth. So it's still not even what we've had in the latter part of this year. So we're in a period of time where the economy is growing, but we know that there are hard times to come. That's why you prepare.
You save for a rainy day.
That's exactly. It's why we have been careful to get the balance right between investing and being fiscally responsible.
So if the economy is doing so well now, what about a couple of things? Half-price public transport is due to finish at the end of January. Will you extend that?
So Cabinet hasn't made a decision to do that. What we have said is we will always look at the specific circumstances that we're in. Now, one of the things that happened with the fuel excise duty is that's actually because of the way we count inflation in New Zealand has actually pushed down on inflation, because it's kept, the cost of fuel down inside New Zealand. So we have to make that judgment alongside whether in the long term we can afford that, because that money is the money that builds the roads.
Yeah,
that's the money that goes to public transport. So we have to strike a balance for how long we can keep supporting New Zealanders in that way without compromising what we have to do in the long term.
That's the 25 cents a litre fuel tax or excise, and that's supposed to come back on in January when inflation is probably peaking at about 7.5%. Will it push up inflation even more? Will it push inflation up even more?
In the Reserve Bank's forecast, it's one of the reasons why inflation stays where it is in their forecast, is because they're factoring that coming back on. As a government, we've said all along, we'll take a look at the economic circumstances and where they are.
So it's possible?
I'm not avoiding the question, Simon, because Cabinet hasn't taken that decision.
But it is possible you could either,
Cabinet hasn't taken that decision.
Okay, all right. We are used to big spending promises in election year. It sounds like you've got a fiscal straitjacket next year. How big a problem is that for you politically?
Well, I think what New Zealanders will want is the government to be responsible and careful, and that's what we've done all the way through. We've struck this balance through COVID of supporting and looking after people while also being fiscally responsible, and we're going to continue to do that.
But when Adrian Orr announced a shallow recession, politically, what went through your mind, because it's happening right at the election?
What went through my mind was that this is something I've been talking about for some time. 2023 is going to be a tough year for the global economy. New Zealand is an open trading nation. We'll always be impacted by that. So we've been preparing for this, Simon. We've been carefully working our way to the point that we face this economic crisis with more people in work than we've ever had, with incredibly low public debt, with wages that have risen faster than inflation. We're as well positioned as any other country to deal with what is a challenging period.
But politically, you probably went, oh, bugger.
Look, I've learned over the time I've been the Minister of Finance that if you react that way to everything that you see, you're going to be a pretty depressed person.
But some people are saying National's been handed the election.
Look, the election's a year away. And bear in mind, these forecasts of a recession are forecasts. I'm going to be working day and night to make sure that New Zealanders get through what's going to be a really difficult economic period in the best possible shape. New Zealanders will then make their judgment on that. They've seen what we did during COVID and they'll see how we cope here.
So just finally, what is your Christmas economic message to Kiwis?
My economic message is we've worked really hard through COVID to get ourselves to a point where we're as well positioned as anybody to deal with this. Times are going to be tough in 2023, but the New Zealand economy is well positioned to support people through that.
Are Kiwis going to believe you, or are Kiwis even going to care, given that they might have to tighten their belts during Christmas? They might view you as the Christmas Grinch and Adrian Orr as the Christmas Grinch.
Look, New Zealand's in a really, really strong position to deal with this, and I think New Zealanders will make their judgments as they do in the face of the facts when they come to the election next year. I know that this has been a really hard couple of years for people, but we've still got their back.
Finance Minister Grant Robertson, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Simon.